Thank you all for joining us today. This is a webinar on innovations in climate democracy. It is part of a series People Powered has been working on with the Open Government Partnership and the Trust, Accountability, and Inclusion Collaborative. And we're very excited to be beginning the third webinar in the series. And we'll have one more on mainstreaming democracy on July 2nd. So please make sure you join us for that as well. So to design the content and the speakers for these webinars, it has been a partnership between our three organizations, two of which you will hear from today. So we will start off with some welcome and introductions. If we can go, perfect. Before we move into a bit of what do we mean by climate democracy? Why are we here? Who's working on this? To add a bit of framing for our conversation. We'll then hear from some people in the field who are working on climate democracy in action before turning to thinking about how do we build capacity for this kind of work. And we'll hear a few different perspectives from people working with civil society, people funding this work, as well as government capacity building. We'll then have a quick Q&A of 10 minutes before wrapping up, and we'll then have a 30-minute optional session where you will be able to join breakout rooms with any of the speakers to ask them questions and to hear a bit more about the work that they do. So we are very excited to have 5 speakers and me joining us today. We have Adna, who is the lead of policy and partnerships at the Open Government Partnership based in the US. We have Ali joining us from the Global Partnership for Social Accountability, connected to the World Bank, so from the United States. We have Jose Marin, who is the lead of OGP Local at the Open Government Partnership, joining us from Germany. We have Maria, who is joining us from Ciudadanos por la Transparencia from Mexico. And we have Riska, who's a program manager at the Kota Kita Foundation in Indonesia. And I'm Zoe. I am the Climate Democracy Associate at People Powered, based in the UK. So before we go on to hear from all of these people about the work they do, I want to take a moment to think about what we mean by climate democracy. So the base of climate democracy is thinking, okay, we have a climate challenge. We have something that we're working on that is not a simple, easy to fix problem, but is something that is often complex. It can be intractable, but they also vary hugely. There are many elements of the climate crisis. There is no one simple challenge and no one simple fix. So the elements we think about when we discuss a climate challenge often include thinking around adaptation, mitigation, how we create more resilient societies, whether in the physical world or the social, as well as conservation. How do we keep what's already there? And a well-framed climate challenge is not only about one of these 4 things, but it also articulates the systemic aspects and thinking about the socioeconomic dimensions and other elements embedded in a climate challenge needed to reach a just transition. So how do democratic innovations come into this? When we talk about democratic innovations, we're thinking about what is the existing democratic infrastructure, what are the institutions that we already have, and how can we think about ways to make them either more accessible by centering voices of citizens, more robust, perhaps more accountable, maybe more transparent, and often a combination of all of these things. And so we do that by testing and trying new forms of citizen engagement. We think about how we can create more capacity for more informed decision making. And we also think about how we open up the existing processes and institutions we already have. But a democratic innovation can take many forms. And we often say in our accelerator program, some people from there you'll be hearing from later, that there are almost infinite forms of democratic innovations, particularly when we're talking in a global context. But when we bring these things together, when we think, okay, how can we tackle a climate challenge with the tools of democratic innovations, this is what we mean when we're talking about climate democracy. So this, again, has many different names, and we're calling it climate democracy here today, but people talk about climate action, particularly if it's climate action engaged in decision making. We think about climate engagement that's trying to also increase awareness or action. This is also participation in climate policy making, and there are many, many other names to encompass what we do when we talk about climate democracy. So in this webinar, we will span these different forms to think together about how we can build more capacity for this work and the actions people are already taking. So who is working on climate democracy? Today, you'll hear from people from each of these perspectives. So we have local, regional, and national governments. So this might be civil servants, officials, elected officials, policymakers. We also have civil society and non-governmental organizations who are taking action often outside of those policymaking structures, but usually interacting with them. We have funders who often are contributing to the work that the civil society and non-governmental organizations are doing to increase the capacity for climate democracy. And we have citizens and all the people who are pushing for greater action, transparency, and participation. And throughout this webinar, when we use the term citizens, we're meaning a much broader base than any official passport carrying connotation, but the people who are engaged in the work, people who are contributing to these kinds of participatory programs and taking action. So why are we at People Powered working on climate democracy? We as a team are dedicated to thinking about how we achieve a just transition and how the tools of participatory democracy help us do that. So when we talk about a just transition, what we mean is a movement towards a net zero future, which includes all people from all places equitably bearing the cost. And so to ensure we get to this future, we have to think about not just the concrete elements of a climate challenge, but also how we think about, for example, the inclusions of marginalized communities and voices, how we think about education, information, and evidence, the wider, bigger systems that are across disciplines and sectors impacting how a climate challenge manifests itself, and then what the rundown socioeconomic impacts of these things are. And so what we do is sorry, what we do is think about how we can use public participation to help us move towards a just transition. And so why does a just transition need public participation? We think here at People Powered that it is able to broaden and deepen understanding of climate risks and government action to help build more resilient communities, which in turn will reduce things like emissions. We also think that by engaging marginalized groups most impacted by climate issues and shaping the policy and holding decision makers accountable, that better policy will be made. Also, through having robust public participation in these processes, we're able to think about what are the unintended impacts, what are the things that it's actually hard to see, and who's making these decisions and shaping what these policies look like. And then it also more fundamentally can shift relationships between, for example, governments and the citizenry to build trust and overcome obstacles that you need when trying to encounter these very big, complicated societal problems. So before we turn to hear a bit from our speakers about what this looks like in action for them, I'd love to hear from you in the chat about what climate challenge you are working on and whether you found democratic innovations to help. Let's give people a minute to add something there. So yeah, what climate challenges are you working on and have democratic innovations helped you do this? Okay, Chris is talking about working on flooding and displacement. That's a huge challenge. And also on another spectrum, we have energy transition, sustainable mobility, how we tackle climate injustice from the Biosphere Foundation, how to build more capacity for climate action, which we'll be touching on as we go through this event. Energy sobriety at a local regional scale. I haven't heard that term before, but I'm very curious to learn more. How we can create expertise among young people in tackling climate change, what a global commons alliance on systems might look like to safeguard the planet, how we think about things like locally led adaptation and awareness in rural communities. Thank you all for sharing. And yeah, please continue populating the chat. And we will touch on many of these things as you hear from people who are working on this issue today. And on that note, to think a bit more about what climate democracy looks like in action, we will now hear from Maria and from Adna, who will each tell you a bit more about the work that they're doing to tackle the climate crisis through the tools of democratic innovations. So Maria, I think over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a pleasure to say hello to you. My name is María José Tejero. I live in Cancún, Mexico, Quintana Roo. If we can go to the following. Well, I belong to a civil society organization that is called Ciudadanos por la Transparencia, and we dedicate ourselves to governance. What we do as an organization, we are working with the climate challenge in Quintana Roo. So this is a very touristic place. We have more than 21 million of tourists. So we understand that we have more than 80% of growing in Mexico. So we have a lot of environmental stress in our area, and the 54% of the municipalities are not ready for this sort of climatic crisis, and we have high vulnerability. When we started understanding this climate crisis, we realized that we had been growing economically, but we haven't done much as regards climate efficiency. So we knew that we were like that we were in a very bad position as regards the climate, the climate protection. So we started a climate challenge because there is a high vulnerability and efficiency in addressing the climate crisis in Quintana Roo. So we started speaking, and more than 80% of the specialists agreed that the corruption is the main problem that prevents the crisis from being addressed. So the democratic innovation that we propose is related to OGP and people-powered program, and the method is a participatory policy making. We have chosen this because we have a historic moment in Quintana Roo since 2021 and 2022. From the citizenship, we started making differences and having a protection of Quintana Roo's environment and environmental services. We have a plan that integrates the different powers, and we have the main plan as the citizen involvement. So what we do is to protect Quintana Roo's environment and environmental services that we offer to the residents and tourists. And our project is to have an environmental governance within the strategic plan for sustainable development. We will have different stages, and we want to work on climate governance. This project was thought in 4 different phases. The first one is the preparation phase, which is to organize the different activist groups, universities, governments to prepare this governance chapter with a diagnosis and a justification, and to prepare the different participation stages. Number 2 is citizen activation, that is to take care of these stages by forums, roundtables, and to talk to different people. And in the third one is the data analysis and the systematization in order to have all this ready in the chapter. Number 4 is a phase to deliver to the executive branch, to the government of our Quintana Roo place. And this will be thanks to the media. Next one, please. These are the different organizations that are part of us. We have been working with the civil society organization. We have been working with different action plans, and we have been creating different scaffolding for this to take place. And the last slide, please. So in order to see some advances and to generate and integrate more alliances from different sectors, we are going to be opening into more stakeholders. And here we have seen the lessons learned. It's very important to understand that we need to create legal and institutional basis to support the project, so as to make Quintana Roo possible to have this project. Especially in this sort of participatory projects, we need this legal basis, and we need to answer very quickly to the context that is always changing. And also, we need to involve voices in a more tailor-made participatory process. And we also need to understand that we work with people and that their capabilities are very important. Yes, they are over technocratic processes. I don't know if you have any other questions, or this is my end.
Thank you so much, Maria. And yes, later we'll have time for people to join your room to ask you questions. And that was a great taste of the work that you've been doing. And to mention, Maria designed this program in our Climate Democracy Accelerator, supported by us at People Powered and OGP, which we'll tell you a bit more about later. But for now, I would now love to hand over to Adna to tell us a bit about how we can take climate action through open government. So over to you, Adna.
Thanks, Zoe, and hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. So what I want to talk to you about is, Zoe was mentioning at the beginning, the different organizations, different approaches to taking climate action, and open government approaches we see as being one of those ways to build climate democracy and integrate climate democracy through open government. So what do we mean by open government and climate action? If you can just, oh, thank you so much. Okay, who's managing the slides? So what we're talking about, what do we mean by open government in climate action? The values of open government are transparency, participation, and accountability. So what we mean is embedding these values in the development and the implementation of policies and actions to tackle climate change. And this is the foundation, really, of the Open Government Partnership, which I don't know how many of you here today are familiar with it, but it is a domestic mechanism for dialogue between government and civil society. We currently have 75 national and over 150 local jurisdictions who are taking these values and designing together, civil society and government designing together their priorities and policy reforms to address many issues, which climate action is absolutely one of them that we're seeing rise up through the partnership. This has actually been a priority for our members since the founding of the Open Government Partnership in 2010. Environment more broadly, and then in more recent years, this really pertinent and more very important issue of climate since probably 2018, 2019, through action plans at the domestic level. Next slide, please. Keep going, please. Thank you. So when we were designing our new 5-year strategy last year, we did a consultation, a very broad consultation with our community stakeholders. And what we heard very strongly was that we need more open government and more ambition in the climate space. So we need governments to take more action around climate with the open government principles of participation, transparency, and accountability at their heart. And for this reason, we launched something called the Open Government Challenge, right? So this is a call to our community to take up ambitious action in this space. And it's also a way to recognize them. So when we do get these ambitious reforms through the challenge, Open Government Challenge process, we seek to recognize them, to lift them up, to spotlight them. And specifically, this is by recognizing them through international fora. So OGP organizes regional meetings, summits, events with partners and so on. And these ambitious reforms, we seek to spotlight them in those. We do inspirational stories about what they're doing. We invite them to share progress with the open government partnership community. And then we also have a challenge award that will be given out. So this is really a way to respond to that call for more climate democracy and more ambitious action. If you need more information or you want to see how to participate, I've added the link to the bottom of this slide, and I can talk about it later in the breakouts as well, if anyone is interested. Next slide, please. I just wanted to close out by giving you some examples of the actions that we are seeing that are challengey, I guess, in this space. So one of them is actually from Quintana Roo, Mexico, where it's the Anti-Corruption and Environment Co-Creation Roundtable, where like I said, at the domestic level, civil society and government are working together on a regular basis in a regular mechanism and process around questions of anti-corruption and environment. That is the most pressing issue, as Maria Jose was also speaking about earlier. Another example is from Santo Domingo de los Chilas in Ecuador, where again, we see a collaborative design program and implementation. Well, it's a collaborative process to design and implement a program for new youth leaders on sustainable development. So again, civil society and government working together to create this new leadership around sustainable development. And then an example from the national level, from the government of Chile, who is working with their civil society counterparts on a participatory process to implement the Escazú agreement. So all examples of this ongoing democratic process that they have built into at the domestic level around climate action. So I'll stop there, Zoe.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anna. And in the second half, we'll be thinking more about how we build capacity for programs like this and like the one Maria shared. But before we do, we wanted to share one more program. And I can actually see Uma Shankar, who led this work, has been able to join the webinar, but I will be sharing it on his behalf. So Uma Shankar is from an organization called Himad Samiti, and they were in our last cohort of the Climate Democracy Accelerator Program, and they've come up with a citizen assembly process to think about how they do watershed management and reforestation in their community in the Himalayas, which is a biodiversity hotspot. And what's really interesting about this program is they are using both the process and structure of a citizen assembly alongside the traditional forest management structures in their region. And we wanted to share a video as they have begun implementing their program. That's a bit of a dispatch from the field to see a bit more of the climate democracy in action. So they've prepared us this great video where we can see shots of the places that they're working in and the communities that they've been working with. And we can hear a little bit about the first stage of the assembly design process, which has been working with local leaders who have traditionally led these forest councils to come together into a wider assembly where they, for the first time, are coordinating together to think about the structure as a whole. So the first step they did was speak to different community members, both about what they've seen and the impacts of the deterioration, but also how it's been impacting their lives in an initial evidence gathering mission to decide what to share in the assembly process and how to decide what evidence is considered by the assembly members. And one particular thing that came through is the difficulty of thinking about how they continue to support the agricultural projects in the region while also thinking about how they change the forest management as it has existed. And so they have held some initial, as you can see in the short video, initial discussions in oh, sorry, I think I accidentally got put on mute. And again, here's another short video of another of these processes. And here's Jeet, who also worked with us in the design of this, to think in these smaller groups before the assembly begins about how to design the session. There, I see a question about audio. Everyone is speaking in the video in their own languages, and so we had captions presented by the team, but they also sent me some notes so I could explain a bit more. And here are some final shots of the region and of the work that they are doing, as in the next 2 weeks they will begin starting on their assembly process. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And again, thank you, Uma Shankar. I can see you in the room for sharing that video with us. And so in thinking about the examples that we've seen already, from Maria working on participatory policymaking with her local government, to Uma Shankar thinking about, well, how do we do democratic innovations in the context of places that have robust traditional governance structures, and how can we bring the tools of each together to think about climate action and climate democracy. We now want to spend some time thinking about how we build this capacity for more of this work, for governments to open, for civil society to work in an embedded way with them. And so to do that, we will hear from Riska, Ali, and Jose, and we'll first go to Riska, who's going to tell us a bit about her work at Kotakita, and particularly how we can think about building capacity, not just as an organization or as a government, but with the communities that we want to participate in these processes, and how to build those relationships and build capacity in that. So Riska, over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for having me. My name is Riska, and as Zoe mentioned, I'm going to share our lessons working on promoting climate democracy, particularly from the perspective of civil society organization. Next, please. Perhaps before I start, I should give a brief introduction about Kotakita. So we are a non-government organization based in Solo, Indonesia. And Kotakita literally means our city. So we work to promote citizen participation in the design and development of cities. And one of our core issues that we work on is climate resiliency. Next. As for the climate challenges, next, please. For you who might not know about Indonesia, Indonesia is an archipelagic country located in Southeast Asia, and we have more than 17,000 islands. And as we comprise of a lot of islands and we're located in the Ring of Fire, our country is actually prone to multiple hazards such as earthquakes and tidal wave, and also one of the world's most vulnerable region to climate crisis. And one of the issues that we face in our work in promoting climate resilience is that there's still a knowledge gap on climate crisis and how it can affect the city's future. This knowledge gap is, like between the local government, big cities versus the local government in small cities, or between the government and local communities, for example, or between the different members of communities. There's still knowledge gap. And secondly, the under-resourced cities, typically the small and medium-sized cities, which is a lot in Indonesia, are highly dependent on the national government in terms of resources and programming. And the planning on climate adaptation and mitigation, for example, are heavily top-down with little participation from local government and especially the impacted communities. And the local communities itself, they're actually the one who experience the impact of climate crisis, but they are often not empowered enough to address the larger phenomena. Next. So essentially what we do as a CSO, civil society organization, is we both work with the local government and the local communities, promoting participation and inclusion of all actors in climate adaptation and mitigation effort. So what we do, one of the things that we do is facilitate the government and communities in the development of climate resilience programs and policies, ensuring that there is participation of wider communities in climate agenda. And one of the example that I can share is the green participatory budgeting policy that we co-developed with the local government of Semarang, where we advocate for specific allocation for climate-related programs that can be proposed by the community, which we propose within the existing participatory budgeting mechanism that exists in Indonesia. And second, we do capacity building and awareness raising on climate resilience issues. We do this to the government and local communities. For example, we have climate adaptation training to local government to build their capacity in conducting participatory vulnerability assessments. And we also have Urban Citizenship Academy, where we promote youth activism in addressing urban problem. And this year, for example, we focus the academy on the issue of climate resiliency with coastal communities. And we also do promote on-ground actions with local communities. So we do on-ground projects like riverbank public space, urban green school, advocating for low carbon mobility infrastructure. That's some of the examples. Next. And what has been the key learnings so far? I guess the first and the foremost for us is how do we break the silos? Because that's, I think, one of the challenges in Indonesia is each department is working separately, and how do we actually bring different actors to the same table and create a shared vision? And for us, multi-stakeholder dialogues is one of the steps that we can do to, ensuring the development of shared vision is happening and, involving everyone, all representative in the city. And secondly, and I think it's very important, is how do we actually ensure social inclusion in the climate policies and program? We all understand that there are some groups that are, more vulnerable to climate crisis than the others. And these groups are usually not invited or less heard in the planning process. And how do we actually ensure that the needs and aspiration of the most vulnerable, for example, women, elderly, person with disabilities, is reflected in the policies? And in that case, actually, on the right side, I put some of the tools and methodologies that we often use. Kota Kita has extensive experience in facilitating the participation of these communities, and we can share our methodologies in the discussion if anyone interested to hear more. And next, I think yeah, it's important to take into account the potential of youth groups in climate action, particularly these days, as they're going to be the driver of change in the future. And it's important to empower and leverage their voice, the voice of youth in climate action. Next, another learning that we have is how do we actually empower local actors? I think we all understand that there's no one size fits all solution for each area or each communities, and there's already a lot of knowledge on the ground, and I guess we need to leverage the local knowledge and adaptation learnings from the knowledge of the people on the ground. And lastly is, I guess this is also very important, is how do we sustain local actions? You know, this has been one of the big challenges in implementing climate adaptation and mitigation programs, because usually in sustaining this type of action, one of the challenges is still lack of funding, for example. And one of the homework is, I guess, to make funding available to both local government to sustain this type of programs, and for the local communities itself on basically how do we embed socio-economic benefit in community-based program to sustain their actions. So I guess that's the learnings from Kota Kita for now. I'm happy to continue the discussion in the breakout session. Back to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Iska. And I think those learnings are really valuable and things that each of us in our own work can pick up on to build our own capacity for climate democracy. And particularly on your last point about how do we make funding more available, more sustainable, and how do we fund the work that we do, we'll now go to Ali to talk a bit about lessons learned on funding green accountability. Over to you, Ali.
Thanks, Zoe. So as Zoe mentioned, I'm Ali Rahim. I had the Global Partnership for Social Accountability, which is hosted at the World Bank. We've been thinking for the last year and a half about what this green accountability means. And I think it's very much linked to the concepts of climate democracy and bringing those concepts of climate democracy to bear on the emerging climate finance architecture and system. And I think the key point is that the inclusion we're talking about, the participation we're talking about, the engagement we're talking about, isn't just to create a fairer system, but a system that actually gets to the climate impacts we need to reach. And I think that's an important distinction, because the normative values we're advancing in participation are critical, but this is actually critical to the quality of finance as well. So last year we commissioned a report by a group called Systemic with other partners, and that modeled what sort of the effects of more systemically integrated transparency, participation, accountability could be in climate finance. And having these systemic ways for people to have a voice and role in the climate decisions that impact their lives actually goes to the heart of the quality of capital. The model showed that you could have tens or even $100 billion of more effectively allocated capital a year. That's because capital is invested more effectively when people have an ability to participate in both design and oversight. Capital is deployed more efficiently, avoiding mismanaged funds, corruption, and unintended consequences. And then there are more equitable outcomes when you manage vested interests, you're looking at issues of social and economic justice, and you're making sure investments are fit for purpose and catalytic. So green accountability is really about bridging that climate democracy into the finance ecosystem, and then making sure what we do is scaling. Next slide. So we want to place citizens and civil society at the heart of climate finance. And next bullet. And so that's what we've been doing with the Green Accountability Platform we've launched. This platform is pioneering a new kind of financing under the GPSA, where we want to create integrated convening, finance, and knowledge platforms that are run by civil society organizations that operate from the local to the global. Next bullet. So we have the Green Accountability Platform, which is run by a consortium of civil society partners. It's run by the World Resources Institute, which is one of the leading climate organizations in the world, together with the Huayru Commission, which is one of the broadest networks of women-led CSOs in the world across the global south, and South-South-North, which is a leading climate capacity building collective. It's running in 5 pilot countries: Mexico, Bangladesh, Cameroon, Senegal, and Brazil. And here we're trying to see what it would mean if we could do this at scale. This is a modest pilot platform. It's It's $5 million over 2 years, but it's trying to create that initial architecture to scale the kinds of activities we've been seeing showcased today, to make sure we reach local CSOs and CBOs, to deliver network solutions that can cover, hopefully at a time, entire countries, that we're building platforms collaboratively with government that tie into the finance and decision-making, also working with supply-side institutions, and that we're funding all the CBOs at scale. There's a technology accelerator adjacent to it, which is choosing different candidate technologies that can allow for the scale so we can reach more people, that we aggregate data, that we have that broader analytics that can help us drive the climate decisions. And then many people raised youth. It's important for youth to be climate justice advocates, but increasingly they need to have a knowledge of finance and the technical decisions that go into the decision-making process. So we've launched the Green Accountability Youth Initiative in 5 pilot countries to actually certify youth and give them those technical skills to become more systemic advocates. Next slide. So I think I made this point. We need to connect climate democracy with climate finance, and we have to move away from islands of excellence. I think we do a great job, and we need to continue to innovate and show those islands, but we need to start systemically connecting this to the larger scale climate finance that emerges especially out of the multilateral finance system, the World Bank and the IFIs, but also increasingly with blended finance that comes out of the private sector. So we can't see these worlds as different. We need to connect these worlds. We need a financial commitment that's nested in multilateral institutions so that they're not only funding public and private solutions, that they see this third leg of the stool, as the president of OGP, who also happened to be sort of the founder of the GPSA, always said, if we're going to build a new international financial architecture for climate, it has to include this stool. It can't be separate, and this is a political sphere, and this is a finance sphere. Next bullet. And we have to partner and create collaborative engagements for civil society and government support in an era where there's a lot of closing civic space. I think it's increasingly important to show that civil society engagement is not only something we do to create social license, it's also something that's essential to reaching outcomes. So I think we all need to work together to also build that evidence base and integrate local knowledge into the higher level policy decision-making that's being taken as a new financial architecture for climate is being built globally. Next slide. I think I covered it. I think it's the last slide, right? Okay.
I think so. Thank you so much, Ali. That was great. And a very interesting and different insight into thinking about not only how do we connect civil society and government, but also bring in the private sector, particularly on an issue like climate, where they have so much of a role. And now we will go to Jose from OGP to tell us a bit more about how we can support governments to engage in this work and to take more action.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks. So it's so nice to be here, be able to talk to you a little bit about some of the lessons that we've been able to extract from OGP in terms of supporting governments, not only in being able to tackle the climate crisis through open government approaches that some of my previous panelists have already been able to explain so elegantly. But I think there's something to be said about being able to make these actions build the capacities within governments and civil society, and create a virtuous cycle in which we continue to use and find the ways that open government approaches can help manage these types of very pressing problems. Now, as you probably all know, OGP has more than 12 years working with national and local governments and civil society to change the way in which they relate to their citizens and to be able to harness that power of the collective to solve current problems, such as the climate issue. Now, this means ultimately building those capacities and changing the notions of how governments should work. That is changing completely the way in which policies are being developed and implemented from the way in which had been done traditionally for many, many years. Now, this means that the way that we've been able to identify the best method to embed those learnings is through the action plan. As many of you know, OGP is known for having members develop, co-create action plan and commitments that they implement. And it's not only good to be able to see those efforts come to fruition through those commitments, but there's a very important element of action learning. And that is the way in which we foster and building that knowledge, and capacity within government and civil society. Now, action learning is a dynamic process in which individuals learn by tackling real problems, implementing those solutions and being able to analyze the outcomes and improve their skills and knowledge. Now, one of the things that is quite challenging in terms of being able to transfer all this knowledge and capacity is the fact that each jurisdiction, each country, each city is its own world and no two solutions are alike. So how do we tackle that? And some of the lessons that we've seen, I'm going to give you some reflections. One is that government officials need to work on actual issues to be able to ensure that those learnings are directly applicable to their roles. And I think this is very important, particularly for the climate issue, because the effects that climate change is having in each jurisdiction is quite different, as well as those solutions. So being able to identify collectively, government, civil society, what are those actual issues, when being able to develop those solutions is part of that learning process and building that capacity. Not only that, but it is important not only to know what are the methods and what are those solutions that exist, but to focus on critical thinking and adaptive learning skills for the same reason as before. The third lesson that I want to share is that it is necessary also to be able to develop teamwork and collaboration, particularly when it comes to issues such as climate change. Not only that, but it is not uncommon that the folks that are quite knowledgeable about climate policies and mitigation and climate change are not necessarily the ones that know the best way to do citizen participation and vice versa. Hence, there is a really important argument here to be able to work across teams, collaborate, and make sure that capacity building goes both ways, so that folks that are responsible for developing those climate policies know and are able to deploy participatory mechanisms to be able to solve the problems, but also that folks that are working on promoting citizen participation are aware about some of the challenges and policies that can be developed to tackle climate issues. Now, the last two are also very important. One, documenting processes and lessons is very important to be able to provide that feedback loop that comes around and enables for iteration of solutions and being able to improve them as you move forward. And the last lesson there is also rewarding process. Regarding progress and showcasing tangible results, being able to show those efforts and the results, not only to boost morale, to continue with testing and applying participatory processes to issues such as climate, but also, to create confidence amongst, public officials. So these 5 lessons and this approach of action learning, I think that is very important as we continue to tackle this issue. And one of the reasons why we're so excited to be partnering, of course, with People Powered from OGP Local, from OGP, because not only are we being able to affect change by piloting and supporting all these, democratic innovations in climate, but also being able to ensure that we are doing action learning while we do it. So with that, I will stop my participation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jose. And now I'll make our final contribution on how we build capacity for this work by sharing a bit more about our Climate Democracy Accelerator, which links up these lessons learned for both civil society and government to try to support them to work together using the tools of participatory democracy to take climate action. So the problem that we were thinking about in creating the Climate Democracy Accelerator is thinking, how do we build capacity for both civil society and government and citizens to all come together to tackle the climate crisis? And so when thinking about the democratic innovations that support this, we frame it in the language of participatory democracy. And in our program, we focus on 4 methods, although, like I mentioned about democratic innovations more widely, there are many. But we have resources and tools that help us design processes using legislative theater, participatory policymaking, citizens' assemblies, and participatory budgeting. And each of these, in a different way, creates opportunities for people to shape decisions from the outset and really think and contribute to what can we do on climate action with government, with civil society. And so at People Powered, the way that we create capacity through our accelerator for this work is through guided expert mentorship. Riska, who presented, is one of our mentors on the program, and everyone is paired up with a mentor to help them think about the design. We have cohorts, so every 6 months we have a cohort of 15 people working in partnership representing civil society and government. And so there's a peer learning group from around the world of people trying to take action on this. This is underlaid by our step-by-step resources. Our key resource is the participation playbook, which I could speak more about in our breakout rooms. The participation playbook takes you through questions and considerations that help you to think about which method would be best for you and how you can design a really comprehensive, action-oriented participatory democracy program. We also have a self-paced training system. So this is a mix of self-paced training you do on a computer by yourself with a lot of resources, connecting up with other people, with discussion forums, as well as online Zoom sessions where we have moments for collaboration and working together for the people within the cohort. And then the final piece is around guidance on, well, how do you implement these programs? What does it look like on the ground? And funding for people who complete the program, which is $10,000 for all participants and an opportunity for a further $20,000 in funding. And so when we bring all these things together, on our next slide, you can see the participant journey, where these different elements segue into a comprehensive system of support for designing participatory democracy projects for climate action. In the next slide, you can see our cohorts we've had so far. We have had 3 cohorts. Our third one is currently in the process of designing their programs. And as you can see, they come from all over the world and often get clusters in regions or thinking about methods or thinking about tools and how we can tackle the climate crisis as a community of practitioners. A few quick examples of programs that we've had so far in Laikipia County in Kenya. In our last cohort, we had the design for a citizens' assembly to tackle a heavy reliance on rain-fed agriculture by creating community-led climate resilient policies. And we also have another participant from the same county in our new cohort interacting in a similar tool around how do we think about water management, but using participatory budgeting. So highlighting the different ways that we can use the tools of participatory democracy, even in the exact same context. You might want different tools for different reasons. We had a team from Yerevan in Armenia using participatory policymaking to really embed civil society within the government system to think about how we design a linked up green transition from the get-go. And in Chimanimani in Zimbabwe, we had a team use legislative theater, thinking about natural disaster response, which focusing on young people, which really helped shift the relationship of government and civil society into a collaborative space where people were having fun and learning together. And so I'll share 3 quick lessons linked to those. The first is the importance of supporting relationship building between the different stakeholders and actors, which has come up across the presentations today, because involving people early from the outset, we've really seen makes a difference in the outcomes, in the sustainability, and in how these programs continue. We also have talked a lot about thinking about what are the tools you need. So before you go to a high-level conclusion like, oh, we want a citizens' assembly, really think, yeah, what is the tool? What is the issue we're trying to address? And that's how in some situations, like in Laikipia County, we have people actually using different tools to get at different parts of the same issue. And then third, thinking about how we balance lessons learned from past experience with the specificity of each climate challenge and democratic innovation. So how can we not start fresh each time, but start thinking about the knowledge that we have while also picking up the tools that exist and thinking, okay, but what's different here? What's going to really help us be specific and help and change the relationships, the systems that we're working on, and improve on past efforts and attempts. So with that, we can now go to our Q&A. We have just a few minutes, unfortunately, but if anyone has a burning question for the open room, please add that in to the chat and we can answer a couple questions now, and then we will go into breakout rooms where you'll have time, you'll be able to choose who you speak to, you can ask more questions, and we'll have longer to discuss. Or maybe everyone's happy to save them for the breakout rooms. I don't see any coming through in the chat, but maybe that's for the, oh, we have one here. Is the accelerator designed for civil society groups, i.e. NGOs or governments? So the accelerator, but Ali also had an accelerator, the Climate Democracy Accelerator is designed for partnerships. So we really are encouraging people to apply with a partner, which can be shown by a memorandum of understanding or other partnership proof. And there's a lead participant, but we really hope that we have both an NGO and a government engaged in the project. Ali, on your technology accelerator, who do you target as your main participants?
Yeah, we all are loving our acceleration, but we have the tech accelerator, but also atop the Green Accountability platform, there is a innovation accelerator. So on the Green Accountability platform is targeted to funding civil society organization. The tech accelerator is supporting both companies and nonprofits, all who will devote some portion of their technology in an open source way to these participatory challenges.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And I think we have 2 minutes left of our first hour, so I'm going to use this to plug our breakout rooms again. So please join Ali or I to hear more about these programs. And before we go into the rooms, I'll leave you with a few next steps. The first is that the Climate Democracy Accelerator is currently accepting applications. The new deadline is July the 8th, so we have had an extension. All countries are eligible. It is a 6-month program, which will start at the end of September, early October, and you will have $10,000 in grants with the opportunity for an additional $20,000. And so it would be great if any of you would like to apply, and please reach out to me with more questions. Next, we also have an open application for mentorship, which also has a deadline of July the 8th. And the mentorship is one component of the Climate Democracy Accelerator, but if you are further along in your work, and actually what would really help you is mentorship with one of our committee members, one of our mentorship members, then this is a great opportunity for you to apply to. We also have the OGP challenge, as Adna was talking about, and again, please join her room to ask her more about this. And you can follow this link to find out more about how to get involved in the Open Government Challenge on environment and climate. We also have an open proposal for the Green Accountability Platform. This deadline is very close. It's tomorrow. So if you're interested in this, please go talk to Ali to find out more. And the eligible countries are Bangladesh, Brazil, Cameroon, Mexico, and Senegal. And then finally, the final part of our webinar series will be happening on July the 2nd, mainstreaming participation. So please join us again then. And now we will open up the breakout rooms. I just want to thank all the speakers again for your contributions, for coming along and for sharing with all of us, and to all our attendees for coming along. Now you should, once Ryan opens them, be able to select the breakout room you would like to come to. So go to room 1 to talk to Maria and Adna more about climate democracy in action, what their experiences has been and what that looks like. Come talk to Ali and I about our accelerators and how we're supporting climate democracy. and join Riska and Jose to talk about how you build capacity for both government and civil society and what that can look like together. So you should all have the option to self-select your breakout room, and Ryan will stay in the main room if anyone needs any support. Thank you all.